The Galactic Empire had ruled for 1,000 years. Its iron grip stretched across the stars, its bureaucracy tangled in a web of oppression, secrecy, and untold power. From the capital world of Obsidian to the Outer Rim colonies forgotten by most, the Empire's will was law. And yet, in the deepest corners of the galaxy, a storm was quietly brewing, one that would shatter the Empire's unbreakable facade. Lieutenant Calaquin stood at the observation deck of the Imperial cruiser Lucidus, her gaze fixed on the endless expanse of space. It had been a long day, but the night brought no relief. The stars were distant lights against the infinite void, so distant, so cold, much like the heart of the Empire itself. "You look like you're expecting something," said Commander Yarrick, stepping into the observation chamber. His gruff voice echoed slightly, betraying the weariness in his tone. Calla didn't turn to face him. "I've been tracking anomalies in the Outer Rim. It's like they've been there for years, little glitches in the system. I can feel it, Yarrick. Something's coming." The Empire had always believed that it was invincible, that its technological superiority, its vast fleet, and its endless army of stormtroopers could quell any uprising. They had crushed revolts, silenced dissent, and exterminated any threat to their rule with terrifying efficiency. And yet, Calla, a rising officer within the Imperial Navy, could sense the crack, subtle at first, but growing. Yarrick stepped closer to her, his face shadowed in the dim light. "You've been hearing the rumors, too, haven't you? The ones about the rebellion? The ones that say it's just a myth?" Calla turned to him, her piercing eyes locking with his. "I don't believe in myths. I believe in what I see." The last few years had been difficult for the Empire. In some places, there was open resistance. In others, there were whispers. But always, the Empire crushed it. Always, the darkness was brought back into line. But this time felt different. There was something in the air, something that felt like it could topple the very foundations of everything the Empire stood for. On the fringes of Imperial space, far from the political machinations of the Central Worlds, there were people who had had enough. They had seen the horrors of the Empire firsthand, families torn apart, whole planets burned, and entire civilizations erased to fuel the insatiable hunger for power. In the hidden depths of the galaxy, a coalition of rebels, those who had fled the Empire's iron fist, those who had grown weary of submission, began to form. They called themselves the Alliance. At the heart of this movement was a woman who had been fighting for freedom since her childhood, Vera Orin. She had been born on a small farming world in the outskirts of the Empire's domain, a world that had once been peaceful and free. When the Empire had come, it had come with fire and steel, wiping away her world in a single strike. Vera had watched as her family and friends were slaughtered. She had witnessed the devastation firsthand, and she had sworn that she would never allow the Empire to bring that kind of tyranny to anyone else. Now, years later, she stood before a council of leaders, men and women who had suffered the same fate, each one determined to bring the Empire to its knees. The leaders of the Alliance were meeting in secret, hidden deep in the remote moons of the planet Kylos, far from prying Imperial eyes. Vera had called for a gathering, one that would set the stage for the most daring plan the galaxy had ever seen. "We have nothing left to lose," Vera said, her voice calm yet filled with fire. "The Empire is vast, and it controls everything. But it is also brittle. Their power is built on fear, and fear is a weak foundation." General Lucian Creel, a former Imperial officer turned rebel commander, nodded gravely. "We know the Empire's strength lies in its fleet. We cannot hope to defeat them in open battle. But we have one advantage: their arrogance. They believe they are untouchable." Vera's eyes glinted. "Then we will make them tremble." The plan was simple, but dangerous: strike at the heart of the Empire. The core world of Obsidian, home to the Imperial government, the center of its military command, and the nerve center of its power, was the target. It was also the most heavily fortified world in the galaxy. The Alliance knew that even a small victory could change everything. A single, precise strike could send a message to the galaxy: the Empire was not invincible. Vera's team included some of the best, former Imperial officers who had defected, elite hackers who could break into any system, and a small but highly skilled fleet of ships. The plan called for them to infiltrate the Imperial communications network, disable critical defense systems, and then launch a full-scale assault on the Imperial command center. But even with their expertise, the risks were astronomical. The Empire's defenses were legendary, and Obsidian was surrounded by a fleet of warships that could obliterate any opposition with ease. "We can do this," Vera said, turning to the team. "This is our moment. If we succeed, we will change the course of the galaxy. If we fail, we will die trying." The strike came faster than anyone anticipated. It began with a small explosion, almost undetectable, a cyber attack, a glitch in the system. The Empire's central command hub on Obsidian shuddered as the first signs of something terribly wrong spread like wildfire through the network. Imperial officers were confused at first, dismissing it as a minor technical failure. But the tremors spread. In the outer reaches of the galaxy, Alliance operatives had begun their work, severing communications between the Empire's fleet and military centers. Then, in the dead of night, the Empire's sensors on Obsidian began to flicker, indicating a breach. No, multiple breaches. It was happening everywhere. A coordinated attack. A shadowy fleet of ships, disguised to look like Imperial craft, descended upon Obsidian. They struck first at the lower levels of the Imperial Palace, disabling its defense systems with an array of advanced hacking devices. Within minutes, the outer defenses crumbled. "We've done it," Vera whispered, her voice tight with excitement. "Now, we hit them where it hurts." Her team moved quickly, breaking through the final security measures and making their way to the Imperial Command Center. As they did, the tremors of their attack spread throughout the galaxy, shaking the foundations of the Empire. On board the Lucidus, Lieutenant Calaquin felt the first real sign of something going terribly wrong. The star charts blinked red with warnings, and the ship's communication systems began to spit out disjointed messages. "Commander, we're under attack. We can't get a clear read on who's doing it," she said, her fingers flying over the controls as she tried to make sense of the chaos. Jarek's face hardened as he entered the command center. "What do you mean we don't know identify the enemy?" "Now." It's impossible," Calla said, her voice trembling. "They've disabled all our tracking systems. No ship or fleet matches any of our records. It's as though they don't exist." Then, a new message came through, its content like a hammer to the chest. "The day the Galactic Empire Trembled has arrived. The time of fear is over. We will fight for freedom, and we will never bow to tyranny." It was a declaration, a bold challenge. The rebels were no longer hiding in the shadows. The war had begun, and the Empire was no longer in control. The Empire's response was swift, but disjointed. Their fleet scrambled to intercept the rogue ships, but the Alliance had prepared for this. Every move the Empire made was anticipated, every strategy countered. Vera's assault team reached the heart of the Imperial Command Center, overwhelming the last line of defense. They breached the central chamber, where the highest-ranking officers of the Empire had gathered, their faces pale with disbelief. The look of shock in their eyes was almost enough to make Vera pause. These men, who had once been untouchable, were now staring at their impending doom. "I am Vera Oren, leader of the Alliance," she said, her voice cold and unyielding. "And your reign ends today." Without waiting for a response, she turned to her team. "Take them out. Every last one of them." As her commandos stormed the chamber, Vera turned to the control panels, knowing that one final strike could shatter everything. She had to disable the last of the Empire's defense systems, everything they had built, everything they had relied on to crush the galaxy beneath their heel. She typed in the final command. The galaxy shuddered as the Empire's most critical systems were severed. The vast fleet that had once been a symbol of absolute power was now cut off from its command, its officers scrambling to regain control. The Empire was crumbling, its foundation shattered by the very rebels it had long dismissed as insignificant. In the aftermath of the assault, the Imperial Palace was in ruins. The chaos had not yet settled when the word spread through the galaxy the Galactic Empire was no longer the unchallenged power it once was. On the planet's surface, the people celebrated. The streets were filled with former slaves, oppressed workers, and soldiers who had long been loyal to the Empire, now free to embrace a new future. The Empire had trembled. And the galaxy was watching. Back aboard the Lucidus, Lieutenant Calaquin stared at the message once again. The day the Galactic Empire trembled. It was a day of revolution. A day of hope. A day that marked the beginning of the end for the greatest tyranny the galaxy had ever known. But as the Empire faltered, the question remained, could the galaxy survive without the Empire's iron fist to hold it together? Would this moment of liberation turn into chaos, or would it become the spark that ignited a new era of peace and unity? The day the Empire trembled was just the beginning. The wreckage of the Galactic Empire was evident everywhere. Across the galaxy, former Imperial worlds and military installations now stood in the uncertain quiet of revolution. The Alliance had struck a decisive blow, but the victory was not without its cost. The fall of Obsidian was just the beginning of a galaxy-wide shift that had left countless questions in its wake. On the planet Kylos, where the Alliance had first gathered, Vera Orin stood in the war room, the flickering lights above casting long shadows on the walls. It had been weeks since the attack on the Imperial capital, but the situation remained volatile. While many planets had celebrated the Empire's collapse, not everyone was ready to embrace the new order. The Empire's power may be fractured, General Lucian Creel said, pacing the room, but the remnants of their fleet are still a threat. We've scattered their forces, but there are pockets of resistance. Warlords, Imperial loyalists, and opportunistic factions are already vying for control. Vera nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of the table in front of her. I know. But we can't allow them to reassemble. We need to show the galaxy that we're not just another faction. We need to build something better, something lasting. The thought of the galaxy's future weighed heavily on Vera's mind. The rebellion had been born from a desire to overthrow tyranny, but now that they had won, the question was, what came next? I've received intelligence reports from the Outer Rim, said Captain Harrius, a grizzled veteran of the Imperial military who had defected to the Alliance. There's word of a secret faction forming something more dangerous than scattered warlords. They're calling themselves the Crimson Hand. They're recruiting from all sides former Imperial officers, mercenaries, and even some disillusioned rebel forces. We've traced their movements to an old military outpost on Taris. If we don't neutralize them soon, we may face another war, one even more brutal than the last. Vera's face darkened. The rise of new factions was inevitable, but the Crimson Hand, a name she hadn't heard in years, was a threat that required immediate attention. These weren't just petty warlords. The Crimson Hand was composed of the most ruthless former Imperial elites, soldiers with experience in warfare and control. We cannot afford to waste time, Vera said, her voice resolute. We go to Taris. Taris was a world shrouded in mystery. Once a major hub for the Empire's military, it had been abandoned and forgotten after a massive military failure during the last Great War. Now, it was little more than a relic untouched for decades, its ruins hiding dark secrets. For the Crimson Hand, however, it was the perfect place to regroup. As Vera's fleet arrived in orbit, the mood was tense. The Alliance had gathered a formidable force of ships, but it was clear that the Crimson Hand had been preparing for something like this. Their defenses were strong, and intelligence suggested they had a significant weapon hidden within the planet's surface, an ancient weapon left behind by the Empire itself. General Creel, Captain Harrius, Vera began, her gaze sweeping across the room. This is not just about taking a planet back. We need to cripple the Crimson Hand's command structure, and that means we must go underground. We hit them where it hurts. Creel nodded. We've already launched a diversionary strike to draw their fleet's attention. The ground assault team is ready to go and once you've disabled their primary weapon systems. Vera checked the data on the holomap, studying the terrain. I'll lead the ground team. Harrius, you're with me. Creel, keep the fleet in position. If they attempt to counterattack, we need to have them surrounded. Understood, Harius replied. The Alliance forces descended into the depths of Taris' surface. Long-forgotten tunnels, once used to house Imperial soldiers and equipment, now served as the lair of the Crimson Hand. These tunnels, dark and winding, were lined with old technology decaying but still functional. Vera's team was moving quickly through the underground facility, the hum of their weapons echoing through the abandoned halls. She could feel the weight of the mission on her shoulders. They were entering the heart of the enemy's power. One wrong move, and they'd be trapped beneath the surface with no escape. We're close, Harius said, his voice low and tense. Their main command center should be just ahead. Vera nodded, signaling the team to halt. Ahead, 2 Crimson Hand sentries stood guard outside a reinforced door. She raised her blaster, ready to move. With a single, coordinated strike, the sentries were neutralized. The door was breached, and they entered the command center. It was filled with high-ranking officers, most of whom turned in surprise as Vera's team stormed the room. Vera Oren, one of the officers, sneered, drawing his weapon. You think you can defeat us? We've waited for this moment for years. The Empire will rise again, and this galaxy will tremble once more. Vera's eyes narrowed. You're wrong. The Empire is dead. And you? You're nothing more than a shadow. It's time for your reckoning. The fight that ensued was brutal. Alliance forces clashed with the Crimson Hand, but Vera's training and leadership proved superior. One by one, the officers fell, their plans for resurgence crumbling beneath the weight of the Alliance's resolve. As the last officer crumpled to the ground, Vera approached the central console. With a few swift keystrokes, she activated the self-destruct sequence for the weapon hidden beneath the planet's surface. The Crimson Hand had planned to use it to break the galaxy's will, but Vera had no intention of letting that happen. Time to finish this, she muttered, and with that, she transmitted the detonation signal. The explosion that tore through Taris shook the planet to its core. The Crimson Hand's underground stronghold disintegrated, taking with it any hope of their resurgence. The planet's surface erupted in fire, smoke, and dust, and in that moment, the remnants of the Empire's most dangerous faction were no more. Vera and her team made their way back to their ships, weary but triumphant. As they boarded the Ironclad, their flagship, Vera looked up at the stars. The battle for Taris had been a victory, but it was only one battle in a much larger war. There would be more challenges, more factions rising, and more enemies to defeat. Yet, for the first time in a long while, Vera felt hope. Back in the heart of the Alliance, on the moon of Kylos, the victory was celebrated, but the work was far from over. With the fall of the Crimson Hand, the galaxy's power structure had irrevocably changed. The Alliance now held the momentum, but the future was uncertain. At the central table, Vera sat alongside the leaders of the various systems and factions that had joined the Alliance. The room was filled with a palpable tension as they deliberated the next steps. We've defeated the Crimson Hand, but the Empire's influence still lingers in many sectors, General Creel said. There are still loyalists scattered throughout the galaxy, and new threats will emerge as we move forward. Vera nodded, her mind racing. We must focus on unification. We cannot allow another empire to rise from the ashes. The people need to see that we are different, that we are here to protect their freedom, not impose our will. But how do we ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated? Asked Leah Martel, a representative from the Inner Systems, her voice filled with skepticism. Vera met her gaze. We create a new foundation. We build a government of equality, one that values every voice. The Empire thrived on fear and control, but we can thrive on cooperation and mutual respect. Together, we can build a better future. As the leaders murmured in agreement, a new sense of purpose filled the room. The struggle had not ended with the fall of the Crimson Hand or the collapse of the Empire. No, this was only the beginning. The galaxy had been freed, but the real work, creating a lasting peace, forging a new order, had just begun. And so, As the stars outside gleamed in the distance, Vera Orin knew one thing: the day the Galactic Empire had trembled would be remembered as the day the galaxy was reborn. The real challenge lay ahead. Weeks had passed since the fall of the Crimson Hand, and the war-torn galaxy was slowly beginning to heal. The Alliance had taken control of critical strategic systems and was establishing footholds in once imperial worlds, attempting to rebuild civilization in the wake of the Empire's tyranny. However, the new leadership faced significant challenges. The Alliance had won the battle, but the task of forging a lasting peace and a stable government was proving more difficult than anyone had anticipated. Vera Orin stood at the helm of the Ironclad, gazing out at the starlit expanse before her. Her mind raced with the weight of the galaxy's future. They had liberated countless systems, but there was no unified front, no clear path forward. In the absence of the Empire, the vacuum left behind was rapidly being filled by all manner of factions, from warlords to self-styled governors, each vying for control of whatever resources and power they could claim. "The Outer Rim is in chaos," General Lucian Creel remarked as he approached Vera on the bridge, his expression grim. "We've heard reports of resistance groups forming, new criminal syndicates taking advantage of the power vacuum, and former Imperial governors refusing to relinquish control. The people are desperate, but they lack leadership." "I know," Vera said, her voice weary. "The Empire's collapse has left the galaxy fractured. We can't bring stability with just military force. We need a system, one that works for everyone. A galaxy-wide government, united under common principles." "You're talking about unification," Creel said. "That's a massive undertaking. How do we even begin?" Vera turned toward him, her gaze intense. "We begin by forming a council of representatives from all sectors of the galaxy, from every system, no matter their size or their past allegiances. We need to create a foundation of mutual respect, trust, and cooperation. The people have to see this as their government, not one that's imposed from the top down. Only then can we create lasting peace." "And what if they don't agree?" Creel asked, crossing his arms. "What if some systems won't want to join?" "We'll have to show them that we offer something better than what the Empire did," Vera said firmly. "We offer freedom. We offer opportunity. We offer a future, one that isn't based on fear and domination." The Alliance's first step toward unification came with the establishment of the Galactic Council, an ambitious project meant to unite representatives from all parts of the galaxy. With Vera Orin as its leader, the Council aimed to bring all factions to the negotiating table and begin the arduous process of rebuilding the galaxy's shattered infrastructure. The Council was to meet on the neutral moon of Cinder, a desolate but strategically placed location orbiting a planet in the mid-rim. The symbolism was clear: this was a place of new beginnings, where no one faction could claim superiority. It was a place where even the smallest systems would have a voice. Vera arrived on Cinder with her core team: General Creel, Captain Harrius, and Liao Martel, the representative from the inner systems who had been one of the most vocal proponents of the Alliance's new direction. As they stepped out of their transport ship and into the massive, barren hall where the Council would meet, Vera felt a growing sense of anticipation. Around her, delegations from various factions had begun to arrive, each led by their own representatives, some eager for cooperation, others hesitant or outright hostile. The first representatives arrived, leaders from both former Imperial worlds and systems that had long been on the fringe. They were wary, unsure of what to expect. Some were dressed in elaborate armor, signs of their previous allegiances, while others wore the simpler garb of farmers, traders, and everyday citizens. Among them was an older man, his face marked with the scars of many battles, representing one of the Outer Rim planets that had barely survived the Imperial scourge. His name was Chancellor Torin, and his people had lived under the boot of Imperial rule for generations. "We're here because we must be," Torin said as he approached Vera. "But don't mistake our participation for trust. You're offering something unprecedented, and we're not sure if it's worth the risk." Vera nodded. "I understand your concerns, Chancellor. But the Empire's way is over. If we're to survive as a galaxy, we must work together." As more delegates arrived, a tense atmosphere filled the chamber. While many shared Vera's vision for a united galaxy, others were deeply suspicious of her motives. Some spoke of the promise of a return to power either by themselves or through their allies and the prospect of creating new empires in the ashes of the old. The first day was filled with arguments, accusations, and long-winded speeches, none of which brought them closer to the goal of unity. By the end of the day, Vera was exhausted, pacing alone in her quarters as she tried to make sense of it all. It wasn't supposed to be like this unity, peace. It all seemed so distant now. "Are you all right?" Creel's voice came from the doorway. He entered the room, his expression grim. Vera sat down at the table, resting her head in her hands. "I don't know, Lucian. Maybe we're just trying to accomplish the impossible." "You can't change the galaxy overnight," Creel said, sitting down beside her. "But you've already done the impossible. You overthrew the Empire. You brought together the scattered fragments of a galaxy at war. You've taken the first step. And that's more than most would have even attempted." Vera looked up at him. "And what happens if it all falls apart? What if we can't bring them together?" "It will be a fight," Creel replied. "But you're not alone. We're all with you, Vera. And we're not giving up on this. We owe it to those who died for this cause to keep pushing forward." Her heart swelled at his words, but she knew the truth. The struggle for unity would not be easy. But it was a fight worth having. Days turned into weeks, and despite the endless arguments and political maneuvering, Vera refused to lose faith. She knew that the galaxy needed something beyond a return to the old systems, beyond the fractured remnants of the Empire and the chaotic, warring factions that sought to carve it up. It needed a new vision. A new way forward. Then came the day of the first vote. After nearly a month of deliberation, the Council was ready to make decisions that could define the future of the galaxy. Representatives from every corner of the galaxy gathered in the Grand Hall, nervously awaiting the momentous occasion. The vote was on the foundation of a new government, a representative democracy that would replace the authoritarian, fear-based rule of the Empire. But it was clear that there were still those who could not trust the new system. Some voted in favor of a continued military presence to secure the Outer Rim, while others proposed regional autonomy, arguing that the diverse planets of the galaxy should not be ruled by a central authority. Still, others voted for a return to more localized control, saying that the galaxy was simply too vast for a single government to manage effectively. Vera stood at the front of the room, watching as the results of the vote were tallied on a massive screen. It was too close to call. After what seemed like an eternity, the final count appeared on the screen, 52% in favor of a unified galactic government, with 48% against it. It was a slim majority, but it was enough. Vera let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. They had done it. The vote had passed, and for the first time in centuries, the galaxy had taken the first steps toward a united, democratic future. In the days that followed, the leaders of the newly formed Galactic Union began to meet to create the frameworks for the new government. Delegates from former imperial worlds and rebel forces, criminals and scholars, merchants and politicians, all now shared a single table, debating policy and deciding the future of the galaxy. While disagreements remained, there was a sense of progress, a sense of hope that had not existed for generations. As Vera walked through the halls of the new Galactic Assembly, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. They had done it. The galaxy was no longer under the rule of a single tyrant. The chains had been broken. But she knew the fight was far from over. The scars of the Empire ran deep, and the road to lasting peace would be long and difficult. The galaxy was a vast and diverse place, filled with different races, cultures, and histories. It would take time, patience, and unwavering dedication to create a truly unified system. But as Vera Oren looked out at the stars, she felt a sense of peace-hope that hadn't existed before. The Empire was gone. The darkness had been banished. And for the first time in history, the galaxy had a chance to rebuild, to grow, and to thrive. And that was only the beginning.